Hi, this is Adam from Garbage Chute Droids, and you're listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Great pull, kid.
Maybe someday you'll feel different.
Don't hold your breath, kid.
Everything's gonna be all right, kid.
You found the Rebel Base Card Podcast.
She may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, kid.
I'm your host, Greg McLaughlin.
Have I made a few bad decisions? Sure.
We talk about cards, collecting Star Wars, and to people in the Star Wars community.
Don't worry, we're gonna meet up with some friends of mine.
Look for special episodes called The Breakfast Pack, talking about your favorite Star Wars shows.
We will never have a better chance than this.
All right, let's get started.
Well, perhaps it is time to begin again.
Welcome back, or if this is your first episode, welcome aboard. My name is Greg McLaughlin, and this is the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Tonight we have part 2 of our discussion about the Topps Disney deal that happened and was inked on September 12th. In part 1, if you haven't had a chance to listen to, we had Ian Taylor from the Marvel Card Collectors Podcast, Stephanie Garcia from Mama Breaks, and sketch artist Michael Munsha on the program to kind of give us, different insights from the different side of things, from the Marvel collecting side and Upper Deck side. We had, from the breaking standpoint, and also from the artists who do sketch cards for all these different companies. In part 2, I did kind of want to break this into 2 parts because otherwise it was just going to be one super big episode. I invited some more guests on. So we have Sal Barry from the Puck Junk Podcast. You'll hear from sketch artist Rodney Roberts, who's done some work for Topps as well as Upper Deck. And we have collector Anthony King from Force Ghost Conversations. We've had him on talking about his trips to D23 and ICCC, but he's a huge Disney collector, so he kind of helps round out things. Once again, a lot of facets to this particular deal. Some things are still kind of coming down the road, but I'm hoping that with the part 1 and part 2, you'll kind of get a nice, well-rounded insight to maybe all the different things that are being impacted by this. And of course, we have, sets coming up, the X-Men Finest, which will be Topps' first Marvel set. They'll be released in the U.S. physically. There's the Topps digital side of things. So a lot of things are playing out, have yet to play out, and we're just going to try to see what's happening. Once again, I keep saying this is a developing situation, but it kind of is. And so I'm hoping once again with these 2 parts that you'll get a little more information and a little more knowledge as we kind of get ready to finish out 2024 and go into a whole new era of trading cards. So we'll get to our interviews with Sal, Rodney, and Anthony right after this.
Hi, this is Mike Sommer from the Wax Pack Hero Sports Card Minute, and you're listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Great pull, kid.
We're in attack position now, sir.
Hold here.
We're not going to attack.
I have my orders from the Emperor himself. He has something special planned for him. We only need to keep him from escaping.
Sal Barry from the Puck Junk Podcast, hockey guy, and I see him a lot at card shows. We talk a lot at card shows. As I was talking to Stephanie Garcia, Mama Breaks, when you go to the National and you saw, I saw the Whatnot Breaker Bowl wall, and this was an entire wall of LED screens with breaks going on every single one. And it wasn't like, there's 5, 9. There must have been, let's just say 30, 40, 50 screens. And they had and it was this plywood stage. It looked kind of, it looked odd. But behind that, they had a stage with guys who were commentating all this, and you had all this activity going on. There is a section of the hobby this is a significant part, of this hobby there right now, and this is something that, could we have seen this 10, 15 years ago? No, especially some of this is birthed in COVID. We've gone through phases. You've collected cards like I have for a long time. You've seen things come and go, but you go, this kind of stuff is here. It looks like some of it's here to stay. And you could just kind of dig your heels in, or you could put your head in the sand and go, well, that's it. But in some cases, you have to be cognizant of where things are at. And especially if you want to, every time you go into a show, you're not going in there to lose money. You're going in there kind of to make sure that you make something from it. But once again, it's just in some cases, the collectors have, there's more of a different kind of collector, but then you also have to parse out, the collectors that you may have come to your table time and time again. It's crazy how this hobby has grown and these certain aspects, and to try to identify those kinds of folks, because in some cases it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I tried to figure out pretty quick was, like, as far as just being somebody who sells at card shows, like, who my customers are and who my customers are not. So, like, the collector, that's my customer, right? But, like, the guy who wants to turn around and resell cards at a profit, I thought about that. I said, a lot of people are asking for, like, say, whatever, a rookie card of whatever player, right? And let's say it's like a $500 card. And I go, okay, I've had 10 people ask me for this card. Maybe I should get this card. But then you think about it and you go, well, I'm probably going to pay pretty close to that price for it. And then when they buy it off of me, they're not going to want to pay top dollar. They're going to try to get 10% off or whatever, because they're thinking I'm going to turn around and resell it. So just, it's like, I can't make everybody happy. Like, as a seller, like, same thing. Like, I specialize in hockey, right? I have a little bit of baseball, I have a little bit of football, but I specialize in hockey. So the hockey people are happy at my table. Most people just walk right by. They go, oh, wow, cool, you have a lot of hockey. They keep going, or they just ignore it, or they look at me and they go, you got any Wembanyama cards? And I'm like, oh, the basketball player? No, sorry. I didn't have an extra $800 to buy his gold rookie autograph 1 of 1 or whatever. I'm kidding. It's more than $800. But, I know I can't make those people happy either. And that's okay. So it's just knowing, like, who you're trying to cater to, and then just trying to do a good job at that, because you can't make everybody happy.
Yeah, something like with Upper Deck, right? And I remember, like, it's always funny now when I see a lot of the pro set hockey cards from, I think, was it 90, 91? Bought a lot of those.
That's the first. Yeah.
That's the first one. And that, but
first year for hockey was 90, 91. Yeah, pro set.
But, Upper Deck, as we're going to kind of get into, kind of took a lot of things up to the next level, not only with hockey, but with baseball. But can you just kind of, for some context here, what did you see when Upper Deck kind of came into hockey, and then kind of, did they move the needle all? Did anyone really paying attention? Or as a hockey card collector, was it just like, oh, here's some more cards?
No, I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, Upper Deck, going back 2 years before with baseball, that was a big deal. I mean, that was, probably, it was the most significant thing to happen in sports cards in 10 years, because Topps had a monopoly on baseball until, I believe, 81. And that's when finally their exclusive expired. And then the Major League Baseball Players Association was able to license Fleer and Donruss and I'm forgetting the other one. But anyway, so like, and Score. Score came a little later, I think. But like, so Fleer and Donruss, right? So like they were just like, well, why are we getting money from one company when we could be getting money from more companies, right? So that was the first big deal, was that basically like opening up the floodgates for more than just one company to make baseball cards. And then by the late 80s, you had Pro Set came onto the scene with football cards. In 89, Hoops came onto the scene with basketball cards. Now, Topps wasn't making basketball at the time. Fleer was making basketball. And those were kind of tough to find, because I don't really remember seeing Fleer basketball cards. I mean, I wish I did, because there was that 86-87 Michael Jordan Fleer rookie card, which, is worth thousands of dollars. And being in Chicago, I would have liked to have. Yeah, but back then nobody was watching basketball in Chicago until they really started winning. But Upper Deck coming onto the baseball scene, that was a big deal, because they really had to work it to get in. Like, there's this great book called Card Sharks, which I recommend everybody reads. It's out of print. But it's called Card Sharks, and then the subtitle is something like how Upper Deck took a childhood hobby and made it a multi-million-dollar business, or something like that. And so they basically had to like negotiate with the Players Association, and they said, look, the cards that are being made right now are not good. There's a counterfeiting problem. I mean, you had Don Mattingly baseball cards being counterfeited, and And this was becoming a problem because the Topps cards are so cheap, they were kind of easy to fake. And so Upper Deck, first, making baseball cards, that was a big deal. And that was like, I bought those cards and I loved them. And I was a casual baseball fan, but I'm like, oh my God, these cards are so freaking good. There's a photo on the front, there's a photo on the back. The color looks nice. It's an action photo. There's that little hologram that you know that it's an authentic card. And I mean, when you're like 14, put a hologram on anything and it just makes it 10% more awesome, right? It was that sort of cool thing. So when then in 90, the baseball cards came out, and then I remember hearing that summer that there was going to be Upper Deck hockey, and I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be great, because Topps made a hockey card set. They had a sub-license with O-Pee-Chee, which was a Canadian gum company, and they would make the Topps baseball cards in Canada, and they would make the Topps hockey cards in Canada under the O-Pee-Chee license. So really, you would just buy the Topps set, you'd buy the O-Pee-Chee set, which would have like an extra, I don't know, sometimes like an extra 66 cards, sometimes an extra 132 cards. It was a bigger set because it was in Canada. So then all of a sudden it's like, okay, 3 more companies are going to make hockey cards. This is great. But yeah, Upper Deck is making them, and they're the best of the companies, at the time. And I still think they make, I mean, now it's kind of negligible because you look at a Topps card and you look at an Upper Deck card, and like the quality of the other companies it's all pretty much the same now. There's going to be like differences, but the quality's pretty much on par with each other now. But back then it wasn't. Sorry, long story.
No, but that kind of gives us context, because over time, Upper Deck, like Topps, acquires some of its competitors, but keeps the brands. You talked about O-Pee-Chee, and also Upper Deck owns the rights for Fleer, right?
Yep.
Do they own? No, Score, I think, is Panini.
Score's Panini, and Upper Deck bought the IP for Fleer Skybox, and they bought the O-Pee-Chee name because Topps, I don't know if they bought it from Topps, but because O-Pee-Chee went out of business. They kind of sold the card rights to Topps, and they sold off their gum rights, I think, to Nestle, like their confections to Nestle. And then Topps continued to make O-Pee-Chee cards, but then eventually Upper Deck made O-Pee-Chee cards, I guess because Topps couldn't do anything with the license. Just like Upper Deck also makes Parkhurst cards. Mm. So they pretty much picked up the O-Pee-Chee brand, the Parkhurst brand, the Fleer brand, the Skybox brand, the Skybox Metal Universe brand, like all of those like different companies that were competing in the 90s. Most of them are under Upper Deck now.
And so, for a while, you had, and then, of course, Upper Deck gets the Marvel license. And so now, like you had all those, Marvel sets back in the 90s. Now they're kind of over the last several years have been, redoing like, Marvel Masterpieces and, Fleer Ultra and Skybox, doing a lot of these sets under the old brands and appealing to those kind of collectors. But I would say up until this September announcement, how has the Upper Deck hockey side of things, has it been fairly stable? Because I know that, as with any hobby, we've gone through ebbs and flows. But how did Upper Deck and its hockey deal with things like, COVID and all this? Or has it been pretty steady, or has there just been some of these crazy years and then just sort of like kind of dry years?
Well, there were a lot of problems. I actually wrote a big article about this for the Hockey News. It was like an 8-page article. So when I say big, I'm not bragging. It was like 8 pages of like basically what happened to hockey cards and also to sports cards. Because I mean, they're all connected in some way. But like the thing is that there was a huge demand for more sports cards during the pandemic because people were home. People weren't spending money on going out because there was the lockdown, right? There was no new television shows because everything was on lockdown, right? So your favorite TV shows, they weren't making new episodes of them. But then all of a sudden you had the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NFL, and the NHL. They all kind of started up in like July or August of 2020. And they were just putting on games at all times, right? Because they had to play these games. So you could put on your TV on a Wednesday at 2 p.m. and there'd be an NFL game on. Turn on a different channel, there'd be a hockey game. Turn on a different channel, there'd be a basketball game. Sometimes there'd be games from like 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., right? Because they just needed to play them and finish out their seasons, right? So people are at home. People aren't spending money on the things that they normally spend money on, like vacations. And the only thing they can watch is live sports. And so they get interested in that. They start pulling out their card collections from the 80s and 90s and 2000s and say, oh, this is kind of cool. I want to get back into this. They go on eBay, they start buying up cards again. All of a sudden, you see a guy has a great game, and then everybody wants his cards, right? And then the demand goes up, right? So all of a sudden, there was like this just huge surge of demand for sports cards because sports was what was happening. The problem was that there was still the lockdown. So the companies couldn't produce the sports cards. They couldn't print them. The rapid COVID tests used the same type of card stock that was also used on trading cards. So that led to a shortage of that supply, of that raw material needed for the cards. So, and then when they were able to start producing the cards again, they couldn't do like spot inspections because of social distancing, because of how many people could be in a factory at the same time, whatever. So there were like a lot of production problems. And this wasn't just unique to hockey. This was a problem all the sports card companies had, and I think some of them even print their stuff in the same factories. So, if Upper Deck is backlogged and Topps is backlogged and Panini's backlogged, now I'm not saying they all print in the same place, but you know what I mean? It's not like it's not like Upper Deck has a print press in their garage and they go, well, I'll just run the print press. They were depending on other people for that. So you had a shortage of supplies, you had a huge demand. And then when the stuff did trickle out, you had people going and buying it up and then reselling it on eBay at like a huge profit. It even led to some violence where in a Target parking lot in Wisconsin, somebody pulled a gun on a guy because he wanted to rob him of his Pokemon cards. Oh, no, wait. Some guys tried to rob a man who had bought Pokemon cards, and he had a gun. He was licensed to carry a gun, and so he pulled out the gun to defend himself. Like, no, you're not taking my Pokemon cards. But that's how ridiculous it had come. And I remember, like, going to Target and saying, first I'd say, oh, where are your sports cards? And they would roll their eyes at me. And then they would be like, go to customer service. They're behind the customer service desk. So all the Target stores started moving their trading cards, sports, non-sports, Pokemon cards, to the back of behind customer service, or they'd put them in like in the with the televisions and the media and stuff like that. I guess where they could be watched a little better than like by the checkout aisles. But huge groundswell of demand. And actually, from a lot of the dealers that I spoke to, they said that the trading card hobby now is better than what it was in the early 90s. And in the early 90s, it was insane. I mean, I was like 15, 16 years old, and I was like, I was going to shows, and then when I was 16, I started like promoting a show for like my local church, and like we'd always sell out our tables, and it would be Friday night, and it'd be packed, in like a church basement, So I mean, now we've eclipsed that, but it took. I mean, there was a lot of like sleeper years, like the mid 90s to like 2020, pretty much.
Oh my goodness. And then of course, in 2016, Upper Deck kind of creates the EPAC marketplace where not only can you buy product off the shelf, in let's say your local, not only your local card store, but like a Target or Walmart, now you have the ability to buy online and also have some Upper Deck exclusives. And then they can also leverage the fact that they can make some of this digital and have it the ability to, if you buy multiples, you can meld them together to maybe make a physical or make another subset. So they're leveraging that. But what this goes to say is that there's been this momentum, we have a physical and we have a digital. All of a sudden, this COVID brings in a lot more interest to the hobby. But also, you have this 800-pound gorilla out there called fanatics. And in 2021, they start kind of they start talking to a lot of the players' unions for the NFL and for the NBA, and they start locking up agreements. And then not only did you have that, and everybody's sitting around going, all right, well, is Fanatics going to start making their own cards? Well, no. Fanatics buys Topps. And now you go, okay, now we have, now I think Upper Deck found itself, well, there's the Fanatics and Topps camp, and they have their licenses, and we're not really quite sure what they're going to be doing with the non-sport because it's Fanatics is mostly known for sport. And then you have Upper Deck that had the hockey, but they also had deals with Disney and Marvel. Let's fast forward to what just happened in September where, Fanatics / Topps makes deals with Disney to acquire not just, the U.S., but a global license for both Marvel, Disney, and Pixar to start creating cards and whatnot, and also to help, strengthen the digital brands. As someone as yourself kind of, I hate to say the word invested, but it's like, look, hockey cards are my jam. You start to go, whoa, what just happened? What are some of the first things that kind of are going through your mind when you hear about it? It doesn't, it impacts you maybe indirectly, but you're like, whoa, what happens, what's going on Upper Deck, and how, what happened from there?
Yeah, so I did another part of that same big article that I wrote. I did talk to the NHL Players Association, and I asked them, and I just asked them flat out, like, why aren't you going with Fanatics to make your cards? Because Major League Baseball is going with Fanatics, NFL is going with Fanatics, the NBA is going with Fanatics, right? So, like, this is, the four major sports leagues. Hockey's the one that's not going with Fanatics. And they just said, he just told me, we didn't feel the need to make a change at this time. Like, he didn't want to say anything like, he says, I got to choose my words carefully, but we're not really looking to make a change at this time. Or, we're happy with the way things are right now. So what I'm thinking is a couple of things. If you're Disney, you want to have all your properties, you want to deal with one licensee, right? Like, right. Okay, the fact that you had Topps had Star Wars and Upper Deck had Marvel, but remember, Star Wars was not always under the Disney banner, right? It was a long time ago. It was its own ball of wax, right? Before Disney bought it and, made some things better and made some things worse. But so anyway, so like if you're Disney, you're like, yeah, let's just deal with one trading card company. There you go, right? As opposed to dealing with two different companies or three different companies. Why would you do that, right? I can understand why you might want to do that because you could probably sell this off or sell that off. But if you're Disney, you probably just want to like deal with one company, right? And they could deal with as many companies as they want, but it's probably, as far as like strengthening the trading cards, if they're dealing with one licensee, then it's easier to kind of have a greater control. Like, if if Fanatics is making Star Wars cards and Disney cards, maybe they won't launch a Star Wars set when, cards for Frozen 3 comes out. You know what I mean? They'd space them out, even though maybe those are different target demographics, but still, you know what I mean? They would, they say, oh, well, we're putting out this, this sci-fi movie that falls under Disney Pixar, and then we're putting out Star Wars cards, and these might compete with each other. We'll put them out on separate months, right? So it's a little easier when you're dealing with one company to kind of like dictate like the terms, as opposed to two different companies who are competing, but ultimately you want them to succeed because you make money off of them, right? So that makes sense, like from a housekeeping perspective. As far as Upper Deck, I'm worried about them as a company because that's a huge hit. I love hockey, but I call it the fourth sport, and I even acknowledge that soccer is more popular in some parts of the U.S. than hockey, and that NASCAR is more popular than hockey in some parts of the U.S. So, like, me calling it the fourth sport, I know sometimes it's the fifth sport or the sixth sport, or people go, what? Isn't that in Canada? Right? But, like, as someone who has collected a lot of non-sports cards in the past, I think it's interesting because Fanatics is huge. Fanatics, they own lids, the hat retailer, right? And this could increase the footprint. Like, I don't see Star Wars cards that much outside of card shops. Like, once in a while, I might see a blaster box at Target, but I don't, you know what I mean? Like, why aren't they in more places? You know what I mean? And maybe they are. Maybe I'm just not looking for them. So you would know this better than me. But like, partnering with a big company like Fanatics seems like a great idea if you're just like, hey, yeah, we have this thing and it makes money and we want it to make us more money. On the other hand, Upper Deck, so now they don't really have, they got hockey. And even though I think they do a great job of it, I don't think that that's going to be enough to sustain them.
Well,
I mean, they have other properties too, but
correct.
Yeah, but losing Marvel's huge.
Well, what's interesting, and I was kind of thinking of that when I was talking to Ian, is the fact that they are bringing on DC. And what's interesting is that although, it's sort of like when a team leaves a city, but they leave the IP to the name and all that, as you guys were talking about, as far as like the new Utah team coming from the former Coyotes of Arizona. Mm-hmm. So now you think of like, okay, well, we have the Fleer brand, we have Skybox, we have all this, and now we're bringing in DC. It's interesting because, and also one thing that I love is that with Ian and the Marvel Card Collectors podcast and be able to talk to some of the folks from Upper Deck, a lot of creativity going into some of those sets that now may be going into DC, which, by the way, also picked up, what's one of the Gunn brothers, right? The guy that was doing some stuff with Marvel on the MCU side, but now is doing some stuff with DC, and they're up for another reboot. And so it's kind of interesting that you could take some of this, the personnel and the creativity that Upper Deck had, and now kind of just aim it right at DC. And with, just like with the Marvel side on Topps, some of these IPs kind of get a reset. And in some cases, to a collector like myself and maybe yourself, you kind of go, all right, this was a big deal, but maybe this wasn't so bad to kind of go, look, as we're coming out, we're shaking off the COVID, the COVID effect that's had on the hobby. Things are settling down. They're still growing, but now you have this sort of like, what do collectors like to see? New stuff. And we're going to see how Fanatics / Topps deals with Marvel. We saw that a little bit in the UK for as Marvel Chrome. It's also in the Marvel Collect app as well. But it will be interesting to see what Upper Deck does with the DC now that it's not just another IP, right? Now imagine like if you had Marvel and DC, if you had Marvel still and now you had DC, and you go, well, we might do something with that. But now, as you're saying, Marvel Upper Deck loses a good chunk with Marvel. Now that focus might heighten some things, and you go, there might be some interesting things that happening on the DC or some of their other IP that goes, you know what? We can't just sit on our laurels. We've really got to step up our game to make sure that what we have, we take care of, but yet still have an eye on some growth.
Yeah, I mean, when I go to the National, like especially like the most recent National, and I looked at the Upper Deck booth, I mean, they were really pushing their sports brands. I mean, obviously they didn't have DC yet, and maybe they knew something was up with Marvel, but they'd really have to start pushing that if they want to survive, or maybe they just get bought out by Fanatics, and then that's the end of that. Although I don't think, I mean, that's the thing though. I mean, it's like, and that's the other thing too, like getting back to like, if Upper Deck did lose the hockey license, I mean, look at it this way. The National Hockey League now has Fanatics making their jerseys that the players are going to wear on the ice. Basically, another company makes the jerseys, but they got the Fanatics label on them, and they're selling them on their website. And so they're Fanatics brand jerseys. And so, and then they sell everything else like NHL related. So for them, if they just took the card license, I could see that happening, right? I think Upper Deck needs to obviously push its other stuff. And it's too bad because they make nice stuff. And they have all those IPs, like you said, like they have like the Fleer, and Skybox and O-Pee-Chee, although that's not really known for sports. Although I do remember there was this toy shop I used to go to that had like vintage toys, and they just had a ton of like Jaws O-Pee-Chee cards, which just seemed so weird. Like it's like Jaws 3D, but they were like the O-Pee-Chee versions, and they're like 10 cents a pack. And I'm like, man, nobody wants these, because I mean, I guess Jaws 3D just wasn't that great, and now it's Jaws 3D cards, but they're bilingual in English and French, and nobody wanted them. But anyway, yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question or if I'm just rambling.
No. It is something that where, and you who have, you and Clemente, you guys have podcasted for quite some time, and it is something where you go, this is something, and, this is something new, and Fanatics is growing, and we haven't even seen the last of the big, shoes to drop, because they acquired those licenses for the NFL and the NBA, but that doesn't really kick in until 2025, 2026.
Right.
And when you're going to see, what's going to happen to Fanatics when you see them, try to run all of these, and do they have the infrastructure? Do they have, they have Tops that makes, but now are you going to have multiple IPs, and how are you going to handle that? And especially with collectors who are, this is not your 70s or 80s where you can crank these sets out. You throw a base set in there, or you throw some inserts and be done. You have collectors who have more, I think, more, sophisticated tastes, and they want to see different inserts. They liked what Marvel was doing with comic cutouts or these things where they're getting like pieces of this and that. And, can you just put in the same old, relic? Or, like, I love these, not from a relic, not from a specific game. I'm like, that to me is one of the worst cop-outs a sports card could do. It's like, tell me where this game-worn jersey that was from, because it does make you want to attach this to. And so, I don't think Fanatics can sit back on their laurels. I think that once they get that, I would almost think there'd be a bullseye on their back, because doesn't that scream the M word, right? And then you go, and then what happens if they're all under one banner and they're not really doing that hot? What happens? Is someone going to go after them, as we've seen other people being, Ticketmaster or Google or some of these other companies that have been brought under the fire of the government for being a monopoly, perhaps? Right.
Yeah. I mean, we always talk on our show how we're surprised that there's not more scrutiny. When you have one company basically making sports cards for 3 of the 4 major professional sports leagues, making jerseys for pretty much all of the major professional sports leagues and all the collegiate teams, right? That there's no room for competition. You know what I mean? And so that's one thing that we're surprised that doesn't get scrutinized more. And the other thing is the whole breaking thing, because that's basically gambling.
It's got to be more than just doing this. It's got to be entertaining, because you are, in order, you can sell anything probably anybody wants, but to get them back over and over, there has to be a little something more to it. Otherwise, like you said, it just devolves into gambling. And that's, something where it's like, you can do that for a while, but it'll have to evolve. But you're right in that Fanatics has, I go past, there's a tavern that is not too far from where I live, and it's like a Fanatics sports book. And so at some point, it's like Fanatics has its hooks in many, many things.
Yeah, that's worrisome. God, we'll never hear the end of sports gambling now. We just never will. I
think the only podcast that FanDuel does not sponsor is this podcast. I think probably just because I hadn't just said it enough, and I'm sure if I said, hey, I'd be open to it, I'd probably get an email tomorrow. Although you can make an argument that at some point we're probably past the golden age of sports gambling. At some point when it's out there and it's settled down, will the money still be there? Will they have exhausted their audience, right? Because there's a huge growth in that, and we're kind of probably speaking a little out of turn on it, but I would think at some point, that bubble has to probably burst as well, where people either run out of, it's like, I can't bet on every game. Like I don't have that kind of loot. And after a while, like, does it lose its luster? How long does it last? Everything kind of goes in cycles.
Yeah, that's true.
But as we kind of bring things to a close on that, but I'm kind of curious. So, the one thing about these sets, and I don't think it gets mentioned enough, is that it does take a while for these sets to spin up. And so, although as this gets put out, the deal, the ink has dried on the deal between Topps, Fanatics and Marvel and Disney. We see some of the first product coming out, but hockey moves on, right? As we're getting ready to start the hockey season, and you've already had are you on series? What series are you on for the Upper Deck's main sets?
So, I mean, they put out about 20, 25 different sets a year, but like the big ones that people collect are like we call it flagship, but it's like Upper Deck Series 1, Upper Deck Series 2, and then they put out a third series called Extended Series. So Upper Deck Series 1 is scheduled to come out in October. I want to say like first or second week of October. They keep changing the dates around. They just put out their 24-25 Upper Deck MVP set, which is kind of like a low-end set of cards. I mean, it's a couple, like maybe $3 a pack or whatever. Pretty basic set. So they've started putting out their 24-25 sets, but then like last week they also put out a set for 22-23, which I know that's like 2 years ago, but they have a really high-end premium set called the Cup, where like the Stanley Cup, where they have on-card autographs, and then they also have jersey pieces. And so it's like they have to wait for the season to end, and they get the jerseys, they cut them up, they put them on the cards, and then they have to get the cards to the players so that the players can sign on the card, and then they have to pack it out. So a set like the Cup usually comes out like a year and a half, 2 years after whatever season it's reflecting. So, yeah, so we just saw 22-23 the Cup, and 23-24 the Cup probably won't come out until before 25-26 season starts. So yeah, but anyway, so yeah, it's messed up. It really is. I mean, over the summer we still had 23-24 product coming out. I mean, I just did a review of a set called 23-24 Credentials that came out over the summer, like after the season ended, but it's a set basically meant to reflect the 23-24 season. So yeah, it's a little confusing. It is. It's like there's just, especially like the way COVID messed up a lot of release dates. And then it's like, even though they kind of got caught up with some sets and they dumped some other sets. And it's funny because like Upper Deck canceled some sets, but then what they did was they took those cards and then they made them insert cards in another set. Imagine if like Empire Strikes Back Series 3 ended up getting inserted into packs of Return of the Jedi Series 1. Basically like that, if that makes sense.
Well, actually, it's something, as we kind of wind down, I've always kind of thought that, you have so many different sets that in some cases they tend to kind of look a little cookie cutter. I'm like, well, if you took Finest, which is a Topps brand that, like after a while, like, last year we had Flagship, that was a portrait heavy one, Finest, Chrome, Black Chrome. After a while that you had 3 or 4 different sets that looked about the same really. And I thought, what would be interesting is if you had a full year going, if I took a brand that we had, an established brand that a collector knows, and said, we're going to sprinkle some of that throughout the year in other sets. And that would almost be like a separate insert chase. One, it would kind of keep that brand. It would kind of keep it, instead of like, we're going to blow out this one, but it's hard for the average person to tell. But if you kind of knew that, oh, wow, if I'm getting this, then I'm also seeing this chase. And Star Wars did that a little bit with an insert set during some of the film sets where there was a, like throughout the Force Awakens, and then with Force Awakens Series 2 and with Journey 2, you had some insert sets that you had to collect throughout those. But I think if you took it on a bigger scale, especially if you had maybe a set or like a brand of hockey that, if you had Young Guns go out through the entire ones where you had to make sure you were still buying all of them to make sure you got them, you might appeal to some of your, hardcore base collectors that might just want to grab it and go, oh, that's nice, because otherwise some of these insert sets become rather forgettable, or you just don't really worry about chasing them because it's like, well, I got my base set, or I got this particular insert, these other ones, but once again, you got to, these companies have to keep collectors interested. Otherwise, why am I buying the same thing year after year?
Yeah, I think there's too many inserts, and there's also, at least with sports cards, there's too many inserts. And as far as hockey goes, because that's what I know really well, the insert sets are so big. It'll be like an 80 card insert set. 80 cards. Okay. So if your base set, okay, so now I'm thinking of so Upper Deck does they would do a insert set called Portraits, which was hit or miss. Sometimes I liked it, sometimes I didn't like it. Like in I want to say it was 2021, they did these portrait inserts, and they looked like the logo for them looked like the Saved by the Bell logo, if you remember that TV show.
Yes.
So very 90s, and then the players were superimposed in front of a kind of lasery kind of cosmic background, like those bad high school yearbook graduation photos from the 90s. I know that was after your time. I didn't have those either. I was just right on the cusp. They still did just those kind of plain backgrounds for us in high school, but you get the idea, kind of like that cheesy kind of 90s backgrounds. And I go, wow, that's a cool insert set. And I actually did build the set, but between series 1, series 2, and extended series, it was 130 cards.
Wow.
And that's the other thing too, is I'll be like, oh, okay, okay, here's an insert set of goaltenders. Okay, that's kind of cool. Oh, and there's 50 cards. Well, maybe not 50 cards, because that's almost every goalie in the league. But you get the idea, right? When you have an insert set that's 40 cards and the base set is 200 cards, you're just like, what? Yeah, they used to be a little more special, 5 or 10 cards, or I'll give you the perfect example, because this is a Star Wars podcast, and one of your episodes gave me the impetus to do this. The Star Wars, was it Galaxies from the 90s?
Yep, the Galaxy series from the 90s.
Yeah, I finally finished the Chromium set.
Nice.
Yeah, I needed Darth Vader. That was the last one I needed. And I said, it's been 30 years. Maybe I should just buy that card. Just go on eBay and find it, and I think I got it for $5 or something. But you know what I mean? It was 6 Chromium cards, yes. Not 60.
Well, and that had the Walt Simonson artwork on it. And, back in the day, especially on the non-sports side, those you didn't see the autographs, you didn't see the sketch cards, you didn't see the relics or what have you. That's one of the things they had, and especially with the Galaxy sets that all did artwork. A Walt Simonson card, or in this case, those 6 created a little panoramic image. Sometimes you kind of go, yeah, I'm an adult. I have, that can't be that expensive. Let me go grab it. And so I it's awesome that I hear that you finished that. Where and when can people kind of see your stuff, read your stuff, or hear your stuff?
Okay, so I'm basically on all the social medias at Puck Junk, Puck, Junk. Puck as in a hockey puck, and junk because that's what my mom used to call all this stuff, junk. So I just like the way it sounded, so I put them together. And so you could find me on X, Twitter, Instagram, what's the other one? TikTok. I got a YouTube channel. You can look for Puck Junk on that. I got a Facebook collectors group. Got a Puck Junk podcast, which you could find on all the different podcast providers. And then there's my blog, puckjunk.com, which again, it's a hockey blog. So you're not into hockey, that's okay. But still follow me on social media, because I'll just tweet out fun pop culture stuff. I don't just only talk about hockey on social media, especially on Twitter. I'll just to just converse about this cool stuff. I also follow a couple of action figure collectors and interact with them. So really, it's kind of where all my different hobbies I'll kind of talk about there. But yeah, find me on Twitter, Instagram, find me on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, all the things.
Excellent.
Hi, this is George from Meanwhile the Podcast, and you are listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Great pull, kid.
I was today going over some of the timeline of events as far as the Fanatics, deal with the NBA and the NFL in 2021. We're in the throes of COVID, right? Or getting through that. And then they acquired Topps. And then now with this relicensing where they got the global rights for Disney, Pixar, and Marvel globally. And now you have, Marvel going over from Upper Deck in the States. Now you have Disney. It seems like, and then we haven't even gotten to the point where, the Panini will lose their licenses for, NFL and NBA. So it's like we've gone, it seems like it's been around forever, but it's still things just seem like they're just rolling along. Is that how you kind of feel with, in kind of what you do with your art and kind of going through all this? It just feels like we've been kind of going through this forever.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like I'm probably like, I don't have my finger on the pulse of like the card market, or at least as much as I should right now, because I feel like it was probably a surprise to everyone, the acquisition of the Disney license by Topps/Fanatics. And I'm sure you're aware of sort of the goings on on the artistic side, like the sketch artists and sort of difficulties we've had with one, losing the ability to produce and sell our APs.
Well, Topps had to announce earlier that Star Wars, they were going to redo the compensation, right? So
yes, yeah.
Typically you do what you do, A, because it puts your name out, but B is that when you do a set of cards, you get X number back, at least in, depending upon your IP, that you could do and take for, I guess you could use it for commissions as well as, if you're doing higher end stuff. And that for an artist would be how they kind of make their bones, especially someone like yourself that's so busy. You're not doing this full time. This is kind of in addition to loving what you're doing and loving the IP you're working on, getting those APs was kind of your bread and butter.
Yeah, it's kind of what made it worthwhile, at least the work that we put into each and every card, and made that was like an incentive. But now that's gone away, but they have restructured the compensation model to where there are now tiers of cards produced, different levels. And so the price is contingent upon what tier you're assigned, what cards. So there are different levels, and your pay is based on that level. So a lot of artists, myself included, are now more inclined to come back and work on these sets because the pay has increased. I mean, I won't say how much, or if it's, to some artists, it may not be significant, but then to others, it's enough at least for them to give it a go again. Because I had actually taken a break from sketch cards, and like I haven't worked on a set. It's been probably a full year since I worked on anything, and now I've decided to sort of dip my toe back in the water, so to speak. And especially now with the Disney licenses, the Disney, Pixar, and Marvel, like I'm really excited to hopefully potentially get on a Marvel set coming up soon.
Well, and then you have as I was talking with Michael Munshaw, you have done stuff for both Topps and Upper Deck.
Yes.
And when we kind of talked, it felt almost like maybe a reset in that on the one hand, maybe you're working with Upper Deck and you're used to that kind of level of not only compensation, but direction. And all right, I kind of know the deal here. And then you had Topps that okay, this is how it's doing. This is how it's doing here. There was changes at Topps on the Star Wars side for APs, but with this and the addition of those new IPs, and the other reason that you came to mind is like I've seen a lot of Batman on your page. You do a lot of you do commissions, and you do something like a lot of times they'll do the artist sets. I kind of felt that there was maybe something new for you in that, all right, now I have the ability to maybe see if I can jump back in on Marvel and see what Topps has to tell me. But on the other hand, I am kind of excited that Upper Deck is getting DC, and then now there's maybe even some Topps Disney. So there's some new things, and then, maybe it's time to dip my toe back in the water.
So they've recently asked us, to the artist community, to gauge their interest on working on any future, Disney, Pixar, or Marvel projects with Topps. We've had to submit new, I want to say, portfolio pieces, so to speak, but just so they can, I guess, choose from their existing pool of artists or potential new artists to work on these new projects. So I'm fingers crossed that I can get on. I definitely want to get on a Marvel set with Topps just to see, what's different, what they're asking us to draw, what the parameters are, what the limitations are, and what the subject matter is. I'm a huge, like you just mentioned, you look at my Instagram, and I'm a comic book guy. So, like, I love Star Wars, but first and foremost, I'm a superhero guy. So, Batman. So I would love to work on DC if Upper Deck is indeed getting DC, and definitely Marvel stuff. I'm all in.
What would you do? And do you still, to do stuff like that at scale? Like how long do you think it'd take you to kind of, all right, it's not that you forget how to draw because you're still drawing and doing that, but as far as like doing those things at the rate and at the pace, and define that schedule. I find the same thing with with podcasting, right? There's only so many nights a week where you can record. We got it's volleyball season, so I'm like, all right, I can, as I'm putting schedules, like, okay, I can do it this, or this, and I've got that kind of a window. How do you find your time once you're kind of getting back in?
So I can only go by what I see amongst my peers and, like, the group of existing Topps artists that I communicate with on a regular basis. I would have to guess that I'm like the slowest out of the bunch, which is crazy because, like, my work definitely isn't the best. So I'm just a slow artist. I don't know what it is. It's not like I'm trying to, like, perfect my craft or anything, and, like, every line has to be perfect, everything. But I'm just slow. So I try to I'm that guy that always takes the minimum amount of cards, but I'm also a procrastinator. So I'm like, I take the minimum, but I wait until, like, the last minute to, like, crank all those out. So historically, I've done my best work under pressure. So I think it's something in the back of my mind that tells me, hey, you don't need to get an early start on this. There's no reason to get ahead. Just wait until the last minute. Try to do 30 cards in, like, 3 days. And so, yeah, there's really no rhyme or reason behind it. Greg. Yeah, I'm just, and then, yeah, like you said, fitting it in between the rest of my busy schedule, like my day job, and then volleyball, and I'm also a soccer dad. So it's just there's no time. Yeah, definitely not enough hours in the day. And yeah.
Well, it's
I don't
also,
even know if I answered your question.
No, that's fine. It's also interesting that Marvel goes to Topps at a time where I think the MCU, what's interesting about Marvel is that you have, like, you can do the art type sets and then the MCU sets. And, with the MCU, they almost kind of got a reset, especially, after the announcement at San Diego Comic-Con with Robert Downey kind of coming back as Doctor Doom. So it starts to wonder with them, and also with, some of the brands aren't leaving Upper Deck that they own, Skybox and Fleer and all that. So it's almost like, what sets do you think Marvel might get? And, we know that X-Men 97 is coming out Q1, but what sets would you be kind of excited to, like, oh, I wonder if they're going to do blank or they're going to do blank? What are some of the ones that are going in through your head, like, man, I hope they do X, Y, or Z?
Oh, that's a good question. I like, the only one, as you just mentioned, the only one I've really seen any kind of like pub or mention on was X-Men 97, which I definitely want to do because my style, I think, matches up with an animated style more, or comic book style more so, more than like something from the MCU, where I'm guessing they're probably going to want photorealistic drawings that you're accustomed to seeing from the Star Wars sets,
Right.
Stills from all the films, and you know, then you have to worry about likenesses
That's
being
right.
spot on for the actors and actresses, and then you've got actor and actress approval that you deal with, which, I mean, that all seems like such a headache for me. Like if those were the parameters for every single set I worked on, I would not be in this business, because that is definitely not my strong suit. So I'm hoping when they do announce MCU sets or projects that, like, we're not held to that particular standard or limitation. But I mean, that being said, I would love to anything Spider-Man, which I don't know if, because Spider-Man isn't really MCU proper. It's a Sony property, so I don't know if they would even include that in all of their
Oh, yeah.
sets. But I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. Anything Avengers. Like, I mean, I'm sure somewhere down the road they might do like a secret set. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not super picky, just as long as the parameters are something that, like, sort of fit my limitations and skill set.
And then for something like Disney, which I know that they have done, I don't know whether it was a European or I've seen some sparse, I know that there were just some Disney cards out there. I know they had like a Disney, I don't know whether it was a Disney 100, but there was something last year. But I am kind of curious, what kind of excites you about Disney, and what kind of ideas did that even kind of put in your head, as far as like, ooh, I'm wondering if maybe we get this?
Just animation in general. I'm a huge fan of animation and the animation style of art. Just Yeah, just cartoons, because like I said, my art sort of leans more in that direction than it does the realistic side of everything. So just it kind of scares me, it worries me, because Disney has a lot of they're stringent when it comes to their style guides. So just for example, if someone were to ever like draw Mickey Mouse, there's a certain way that you have to draw Mickey Mouse, and you can't deviate from that one iota. So, I mean, I'm sure they're like that with most of their primary characters, whether it be Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, or whoever. So I don't know if they're gonna, like, when they say Disney, talking about the Disney films like Frozen, stuff like that, or even like Wreck-It Ralph. I mean, the Disney has so many properties and so many IPs that, like, it's just the opportunities are endless, and like we're just sort of sitting back waiting to see what they're going to throw our way. So,
and something else is that, with Topps bringing on additional IPs, you start to think about consistency as far as the art directors and the people who put together the sets for, let's say, for Star Wars or Marvel and whatnot. And like I'm wondering if you're wondering, who am I going to be dealing with? And then are they going to be fairly consistent across the board? Are the contracts going to look very similar? Is the compensation going to be similar? And like you said, these added extra things with, like, say, Marvel, if you're doing an MCU set where you've got to concern yourself with the actors' approval, or like what you just said with Disney, where it's like, okay, I have to get this, Mickey looks this way. Or even if we get into Pixar, which is interesting because we got an announcement of a new Incredibles movie. You're going, okay, that's all right. That could be, so it's wondering, and maybe because it's fairly new to Disney and on the Disney and Pixar side, maybe there will be a little more leeway in those early sets as they try to figure out, this is something that would be relatively new for them, although they've seen it. It's not like they haven't seen a sketch card, but it is interesting. What would a sketch card for Disney look like?
Mm-hmm.
And what, like how hard would it be? It's kind of interesting because I would almost imagine that there's going to have to be maybe additional personnel being brought in on the top side, and they're going to be kind of in the same learning curve as you as an artist trying to get like,
right.
I'm just trying to do what you're wanting. Then I think also, let me throw this in. Direction is going to be critical because it's going to be new for everybody and on a tight deadline.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're just all in wait and see mode right now. Best case scenario, it like nothing changes and it's like it's business as usual, just a different subject matter. But we all know, we'd be naive to think that like things are going to be a little easier or the same when Disney's involved. That's Disney's like Disney.
I'm wondering also, it's interesting that you may see on the upper deck side, will you see like some of those brands that Upper Deck will keep that will go into DC, which is kind of on maybe its own little bit of a reset. So maybe you'll see like an Ultra or, Masterpieces or something like that, where they're going to go back to what they kind of do best. Is like, all right, I can't do Fleer Ultra, Avengers, but maybe we can do Fleer Ultra Batman or something like that, where, all right, now we can, what I liked about what Upper Deck was doing was that the sets were bigger, and I think they were harder to collect as a base, but there was a ton of inserts, and I really liked how that kind of was pushing. As a matter of fact, they were aggressively getting back into retail. I was on with Ian Taylor, the Marvel Card Collectors podcast, and I was telling him, like, I went to a Target and I saw 3 different Marvel blasters there. Didn't see any Star Wars. Although now you can see it at Costco. Who knew? Costco had a box in GameStop, but I was like, it almost felt like there was, yes, there was a lot of sets coming out, but there was that push to get it into retail. And I'm like, I'll be kind of curious to see those first Upper Deck DC ones, even though that's not necessarily too much my bag, but just to kind of see like, oh, here's a take. Kind of like the same thing with Pixar and Disney. I'm like, I may not be a hardcore collector, but I am interested, and I'll be especially interested if my friends are doing artwork for them.
Well, I hope I'm one of those friends that will have artwork in the set. So,
what are some of the things that you have been doing on Meanwhile the podcast? I know we went from travel volleyball into the volleyball season, but what I do like about what George and you and Kristen and Rich are doing over there, it's no end of content. I like, we had the summer of vacations. I got to contribute a little bit of that, but I always like that there's something different. And I'm sure as soon as I heard the fact that there was going to be a Hallmark Plus channel launched, a streaming service, I thought, oh, that George just lost a little bit of money because I know he's going to get into that. But what are some of the things you guys have been kind of talking about?
Well, George does a really good job of making sure that we have a fresh episode every single week. I know getting the 4 of us together is like herding cats to him, and I think we really stress him out, and we've aged him a few more years in his production of the podcast because I wasn't able to record last night because I was at a volleyball game, and so he's sure to have at least 2 co-hosts every week, 2 out of the 4, and we just, our show is, I like to call it the little show that could, but it's also the show about not to steal anything from Seinfeld, but it's the show about nothing, basically. We talk, we go in with a few, you know, a bullet list of bullet points of things we want to talk about, things we've watched, things we've done, things we've read, and we probably maybe talk about one of them throughout the show, and then the show quickly derails into something else. But um, I haven't been around as often as I'd like, so I honestly couldn't tell you what they've talked about the past couple of weeks. But I'm going to do my best to be on the show next week. So tune in.
All right. And lastly, just a couple of speed questions here. All right. You get the call. What is let's do this by property. Who's the first one you're going to, let's just say if set non-exclusive. What would be the first Star Wars character you would draw?
Oh, the first Star Wars character I would draw. Boba Fett.
Fair enough. How about Marvel? You got on a Marvel set. Who's the first one you're putting ink to paper on?
Spider-Man.
There we go. Disney?
Oh, that's a little harder. Disney. I'm going to draw Donald Duck. And the reason I say that is because I drew this. You can go to my Instagram at the Art Nerd, and that's nerd with 2 R's. And somewhere in my feed, you will find a picture I drew back during the whole Game of Thrones. It was in the meat of the Game of Thrones fad or craze, and I drew this Donald Duck as a anyway, I drew him as one of the what was Jon Snow? What was he considered?
Oh, he was the one of the Night Watch.
One of the Night Watch. So I drew Donald Duck as a member of the Night Watch. And yeah, it was pretty cool. He had like this, like he was missing an eye and a scar over it. And then he was holding this huge sword and it was like dripping with blood. But yeah, I'm just like I'm most proud of that drawing. It was pretty cool. So probably Donald Duck for that reason.
I like it. Donald Duck, Night's Watch. What about Pixar? You get on a Pixar set.
Oh, Pixar. What's my favorite Pixar film? Oh, definitely Frozone from The Incredibles.
When I know when Incredibles 2 came out and they announced this one, I'm like, that's probably one of the characters I'm most excited about seeing. It's just, I love Samuel L. Jackson as Frozone. I'm like, yeah, I could do that all day. And then of course DC. Do I have to ask what's your go-to DC?
Greg's Batman all day, every day.
All right, fair enough. And then do you do any Inktober? I know that we are cruising through September at the moment.
I haven't done Inktober in it's probably been about 3 or 4 years. Like I was doing it heavily. I'm trying to remember the first year I did is way before COVID. That shows you how long ago it was. And I probably did it for 3 years straight after that. The third year I did it, I actually did a set of cards. I did Inktober cards, sketch cards. So I did one a day. And then actually at the end of the month, I actually like got them all together and like published them in a little booklet, like a little zine, which was kind of cool. So, and I don't know if I did it again after that. That might have been my last one.
I know you did an awesome sound wave for me one time, and I remember the only direction I gave you on the card is he has to be ejecting one of his minions from his chest cassette play. That was near and dear to my heart, like one of my favorite cards.
Thank you.
Then I went through. I was like, oh, that's right, you did a ROM for George. I'm like,
yeah.
That's something I've got to, like I've been kind of playing around with Procreate, and I'm like, I need to start doing some ROMs because that is just. I think that and Star Wars, those are the 2 comic book sets that you could pretty much peel out of my cold dead hands. I'm like, I'll give up quite a lot, but I don't know why I just glommed on to ROM back in the day, but like, yeah, it was just so cool.
That was the first ROM I'd ever drawn in my life. And honestly, that sound wave was the first sound wave I'd ever drawn.
Oh, wow. And as we're recording this, I know that some friends of mine are doing some early screenings of Transformers. I'm like, shoot, is that out? And they're already showing off the poster swag. And I'm like, you can tell like we're, like sports dads, because you're like, oh, that's right. And then you start thinking, I'm like, 2 hours? I don't know if I can commit to that. Somehow I found time for Deadpool Wolverine, but I didn't get a chance to go back for a second viewing. I'd really love to see it again on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm hoping that kind of, we've had some really decent runs of movies this summer, and and hopefully that kind of translates. That would be a very interesting set to come out, because Deadpool Wolverine was just a money printing machine, and with the license now going to Topps, would Topps do a chrome Deadpool Wolverine?
Sign me up. Sign me up.
Fair enough. Well, I'm going to let you get back to it, and it sounds to me like I think, as I'm like, ooh, there's still a little bit of time left in the evening. I've been working on a Grievous forever, but it's the body now that I'm kind of like working on. But it sounds like both of us could be like, well, if I'm not going to be on a volleyball court, I need to get a pencil or a pen in hand, because that got to get everything sharp. But anyway, I appreciate you coming on. I think the bottom line with this is that this really, this affects a lot of people across the board, and it's one thing to do a press release and have this, but you got, I hate to say winners and losers, but you do have opportunities now that maybe we haven't had before. And what I like is that Upper Deck got DC, so they, obviously Panini is the next one to kind of drop down the road a little bit, but I think there's an opportunity for Topps to really try something new. Let's get engaged with the artist community. Let's, and collectors, and those of us who may not have done too much because on the Marvel side, because we were doing Star Wars, or maybe like, well, I think at the end of the day, give us some exciting product, give us a reason to collect, and let's talk about what original art can do for everybody.
Yes.
And then once again, people can find you where?
The best place to find me is on Instagram at the Art Nerd, with 2 R's in the word nerd. You can also have a Facebook page, which is just at the Art, or not just at Art Nerd. And I'm also on that site, formerly known as Twitter, at just Art Nerd, and both with 2 R's in the word nerd.
Excellent. And of course, if you get on a set, I want to be at least the third person to find out, because I know you're going to be talking to a couple other people first. But as I always say, like, I don't need to be on your wedding A list, but at least I want to be on the B list. I don't need to make it in the dance, but I'd like to know at least considered. But if when you get on a set, I'm going to say when, not if, because I love your work, and I hope you get on. There's a lot of stuff happening here. Wish you luck, and we'll talk hopefully sooner than the last gap we have talked in between.
Definitely. When I first started working cards, you were one of the first people to like regularly hype my work. So I appreciate that, and I will definitely. You're definitely in on the ground floor.
I love it. That's all I ask for. All right. Take care.
Hi, this is Josh Trout, artist for Topps, and you are listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Great pull, kid.
I was curious, Anthony, in the recent deal with Topps and Disney, you are a big Disney kind of person, that starting in 2025, we're going to be seeing more U.S.-based cards for Disney and Pixar in addition to Marvel. Now, you collect things, you do things, but as someone maybe that hasn't really, it's not like you're not a card collector of sorts. If some come your way, I'm sure like, that's nice, shelf. But I'd be
that's right.
But I am kind of curious about like Disney releases Disney releases a number of things. They're not want for lack of collectibles. But I was kind of curious, do Disney cards or Pixar cards in any way kind of say anything to you, or you're like, how would you approach that as someone maybe not a big card collector but still a big Disney fan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the right card would sing to me. I don't think I would complete a set per se. But if the artwork was cool on one, or it was a perhaps a behind the scenes image for something, then that would kind of draw my attention. I think at this point, I'm trying to have a quality over quantity approach to my collecting. So it's more of like, does this provide me joy? Does this not provide me joy? Rather than saying like, great, Star Wars released this whole new Funko line, and I need to get all of them because I collect all Funkos, right? No, it's more like, all right, I'm picking and choosing the ones that I like, that maybe was a moment that spoke to me. So I know like some of the cards will be like scenes, right? Like for example, I think there is one that I've seen at conventions before where it's like the Luke and Kylo Ren standoff in The Last Jedi, right? I think that's probably one that I would take because I like that scene and that moment a lot. Also, depending on the price, I think that would fit the mold for what I like to have in my collection. So that's kind of where my brain would go on that one. So I'm always intrigued to the opportunity to it, and I hope that it provides a lot of opportunity for artists to showcase their work and to get involved with that. And I'm glad that card collecting is still a very important thing. Like, it was a big thing for me growing up, particularly in the baseball sphere. And now that I think that they're expanding out into other things, I think that's a good sign for the community, right?
Exactly. Now I know that Topps just recently announced this is going to be a Chrome set that drops in the UK, so it's going to be a little out of everybody's price range. But it was interesting to kind of take a look, because I think just like with their recent Marvel one in the UK, you start to get like, okay, this is kind of what I might expect to see, where in this case it was a 200 card base set. But they had a lot of the characters, and of course, when you're Disney, you have a lot to choose from, and then there's also subsets. How do you feel about, like, they have these kind of like faux signatures from like some of the Disney characters, like a Mickey faux signature? What kind of, like, I don't know whether that's something you've seen before where they've had Mickey sign something, but what does that kind of say to you as someone who likes Disney, potentially kind of collecting that? Are autographs like that, outside of just going to Disney and just getting a Mickey to sign it in person, what would that kind of say to you?
Well, I mean, for me, at least, I will say it doesn't do a whole lot to move the needle, because I just don't have a lot of stock into autographs themselves unless I see that the person in front of me is doing it. So, for example, we just talked about ICCC. I got a signed photograph from Warwick Davis. He personalized it to me. It's not just like I bought something that I don't know unless it's verified by a larger source that it is actually from them. But from like the characters and all that stuff, that you see people at the parks going out of their way and spending a lot of time of their day to do every character meet and greet, and they will get the signatures from them for like an autograph book, or they'll autograph various things. And if I had a card and then I was able to go meet one of like Mickey or the princesses, I think that would speak more to me than getting one with that. But to like the right person, that could mean everything, right? If you're a kid, right? Like, if my niece is almost 3 now, she loves Mickey and Minnie Mouse. If we got her a card that was signed by, she wouldn't know. So she would love it. She'd eat that up. That would be it would mean the world to her. So to the right person, it means absolutely everything. And to the wrong person, it means absolutely nothing.
It's also interesting that if you kind of think about the parks, right? Or let's just say from a Disney live action movie or something from a Disney park, say like a patch or a fabric relic, right? Which it doesn't really, like you've seen it with some, you've seen it with sports cards, you've seen it in non-sport where they kind of include like a patch of the cloth from somebody, or like a game used this or that, or something from the set. I know they've done that with Star Wars before. Is there a live action or something from the park that would say like, hey, if this was a relic or a swatch or something that it made it, because there's not really a mechanism for that. There's lots of things to buy at Downtown Disney and Disney parks.
Sure is, yeah.
But things from the movie itself, or like a movie itself or a series itself, that seems to be kind of something that a card might fill. What would you say to something like that?
That's a good question, and honestly, I don't know off the top of my head what would be the thing. I think just in general, perhaps like a prop or something would be like a behind the scenes kind of image that would speak to me a bit more. And if maybe the person that was like behind the scenes kind of like was involved signed it or something like that, that would be something in my collector's realm that would be like, oh, that's great. I need to at least acquire that, or at least look into acquiring that, depending on what it is. But you're right, Disney Springs is full with a plethora of a variety of things. I mean, they're not missing out on anything, right? If it's that certain time of year, right? Halloween is right now. You'll be inundated with everything Halloween at the parks, and if there's like the Haunted Mansion, that's the thing. They will throw everything Tower of Terror, Haunted Mansion, anything that's spooky will be have a new line out and all that, and wherever it is, clothing, merchandise, toys, action figures, they'll fill up the shelves with the stuff that's hot in the moment. And then once November 1st hits, they'll flip it over to the Christmas season. So the mouse will get its money.
The mouse will get its money. Well, that does kind of beg the question, like about the, let's say, pins and some of the other, seasonal or annual things. I think as a Disney fan, it probably is hard to kind of, throttle that governor down to go, okay, everything that seemingly that Disney puts out is, noteworthy, whether it's Disney 100 or, the X anniversary of this park or that park. What is it for? What is it something that, what's going to speak to you as far as a collectible or something that you can kind of keep the house from turning into, the next episode of Hoarders?
Honestly, I like movie-based props. Like if it's something that is within the realm of, like, let's say an Indiana Jones, for example, right? Disney has done a great line recently of like props from the movie. So I have the Cup of Christ, the Holy Grail, up on my shelf over here. I have Willow's wand from the Willow movie, and then the series, of course. So once we get over to the parks next, Hollywood Studios, I am making a beeline for the Crystal Skull that is there, just because I absolutely need that for my collection. So they have that. They have like the idol from Raiders of the Lost Ark. I know they have other things like the Sankara stones from Temple of Doom. Those types of things, like the outside the box kind of props that if it means absolutely everything to a person that knows it, but if they don't, they're just going to walk into my office there and go, "What's that cup up there?" And then I can tell you, well, that is Jesus Christ's cup from the Last Supper. How dare you?
Are we ready to go? And you're just like, and don't explain it. You don't explain any kind of significance.
Exactly. Yeah. So like that type of stuff, and I know Disney is trying to do that with at least Indiana Jones stuff. They do that with Star Wars now. I've seen, especially at D23, they'll do like the Ochia Bestoon, the knife from the Rise of Skywalker was a thing at the D23 Expo. I love the lightsabers that they have at Galaxy's Edge. So I have a few of them up on my collecting shelf right now. So those types of like actual tangible things that I feel like I'm in the movie are, so I could live out my fantasies of being in the movie, I guess, are the things that I am saving up my money for and then want to purchase, right? I know outside of Disney, Regal Robot does a great job of kind of doing a similar mold to fit that kind of niche that I'm looking for, especially with the Indiana Jones props that they have released. Those are the things I'm saving up my money for. So again, Hollywood Studios next, it's going to be that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So if they keep doing stuff like that, they're going to have a repeat customer in me.
Well, I think it also speaks to, you'll have folks who will, buy a set or, get a collectible, get a card or something, when they think there is value in it, or maybe it's something that they can chase and maybe, flip if they want. But I think if Disney is going to be looking to grow the hobby more, I think having, especially with either newer collectors or like say, we do have some new, I think we have an Incredibles 3 coming up and other Disney movies. And if you want to tie those into cards and if you want to, grow your audience a little bit, I think it's going to be, the onus is going to be on the folks who are putting those sets together. Sure, the first time we're going to see like a debut Chrome so-and-so, great, but what's going to be your follow-up? And I think, you have an opportunity, the fact with some of these, prop items or swatches or things like that they don't really have, they can't really get anywhere else, but also Disney, Disney's used to, all right, this is great, we're celebrating this, and what's happening next. And so I think to keep that license, to keep, people interested, you're going to have to get a little creative with this stuff. And
Absolutely.
I think, it's an IP that, it's not Marvel, it's not Star Wars, it's not, sports cards, it's something else. You want to make it Disney. You really want to make something that speaks to it and to speaks to that audience, to go, we're putting value in this. Not everybody has the Cup of Christ on their back shelf, but that you want to have that connection to it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I appreciate, like I said, we'd had you on talking about your recent trips to ICCC. But I just thought that because we're doing our part 2 on the Topps Disney deal, someone who has a lot of Disney experience would be a great asset to ask a couple of questions. Just so people let you know, you can let people know where to find you. Where can they find you, Anthony?
Absolutely, and always happy to provide my insights on things. So if you want to continue to hear my insights on other things, perhaps in the Star Wars or Lucasfilm adjacent area, you can find our podcast, Force Ghost Conversations, which is available on any podcast platform, most preferably Apple or Spotify for that. And if you want to continue the conversation on social media, we're available on TikTok, X, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, basically any place that most people are on social media these days. You can find us and just search Force Ghost Conversations, and we'll be there in some capacity.
Anthony, thank you very much.
Can I offer you a libation to celebrate the closing of our shared narrative?
Once again, I want to thank my guests, Sal Barry, Rodney Roberts, and Anthony King, for being on the program tonight to continue to talk about the impact of the Topps Disney deal. Once again, this is something we're going to be covering for quite some time as pieces start to fall into place. But I think between parts 1 and 2, we get a good idea of where everything stands at the moment between those folks on the upper deck collecting side of things, those on the artist side of things, those on the breaker side of things, and even those who collect like me, you and me. So it's a developing story. And this is something that I hope you got a lot out of these last 2 parts. I enjoyed talking to these folks. They have a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight, and I just appreciate their time. And I hope you got something out of it, and hope you enjoyed it. Alrighty, I'm going to let Card Squadron take it out, and we'll talk to you again soon.
The Rebel Base Card Podcast focuses on cards, collecting, and the Star Wars community, and appreciates you coming along for the ride.
If you have any feedback for this episode, you can reach out to the program in a number of ways. You can leave a comment on the Instagram post for this episode. You can also DM Greg on Instagram at Rebel Base Card.
Make sure to also follow the Rebel Base Card on Twitter and Facebook at Rebel Base Card. If you want, you can send an email to greg@rebelbasecard.com.
And you can find show notes for this and all episodes on the website rebelbasecard.com. In the Star Wars Card Trader app, and just about every other one, you can find Greg at CornFedTech.
The Rebel Base Card uses the hashtag Card Squadron as a way to alert friends about cool cards and recent drops in the galaxy far, far away. It's a great way to bring our community a little bit closer together and help one another finish our sets in time. We collect, communicate, and commiserate. Well, at least when we run out of credits or crystals to spend on our digital collections. Join the fun, even if all the other cool squadron names were already taken. And remember, we collect as one and would be honored if you join us.
And if you are a sketch card artist, or Star Wars artist or collector, cosplayer, and want to talk about your work, your craft or passion, drop Greg a line. I'm sure he'd love to hear your story. You can also help the show by leaving a comment or review on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you got this episode.
Otherwise, the mission is clear. Keep those cards out of the hands of the Empire, and the Rebel Base Card will return soon.
This podcast is not affiliated in any way with Topps, Disney, or Star Wars, nor is it endorsed by Disney or Lucasfilm, and is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. All names and sounds and any other related items are properties of their respective trademarks and/or copyright holders here in the U.S. and abroad. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com.
That's it.